I'm disappointed at the indications that Speaker Daudt won't agree to a special session. I have not heard from him directly on that matter, but if I read, Cindy Bricado seems to know what's going on, even though they won't communicate with me. And then the tweets from just now, I guess he's ticked off because we gave you a reporter the facts, the draft that they had sent us about their intentions for Real ID, which was to think about it until 1917 or until 2017, and then act on it in 2018. There's just in a world of total unreality here. We got the federal government will probably have a 4-month extension to complete our work, which means we can do so in the regular session. But as right now, we can't even have our Commissioner of Public Safety and her people interact with the federal government or anybody else to work out legislation. The Speaker says we don't have legislation. Well, we can't, because the state law forbids us from putting our personnel in place to do that. So it's just very disappointing that we're going to start the year with this lack of any sensible cooperation. Real ID, I think we handed out what we received from Homeland Security in terms of our deficiencies. I mean, this is just basic information: Social Security number, proof of legal residence. It's just, very fundamental information that the federal government says it needs to assure the safety of our airplanes. People getting on an airplane want to know that the other people on that airplane meet the standards, the qualifications that the Real ID would require. And those who say that criticize the Obama administration for not doing all that it can to prevent terrorist activity in the United States, and I think most of that is unfounded, but then won't even allow the federal government to have the most basic information by which it can protect our citizens. So I urge the Speaker to reconsider. The Real ID it has to be done. It has to be done in a timely fashion. We shouldn't leave Minnesotans with the uncertainty that they'll be denied access to a commercial airplane or to a federal building. There's no sensible reason not to take care of this entirely in a special session, frankly, but at least to unbound our administration so we can get this done. And I was also disappointed with the comment that I read quoted the Speaker in MinPost that says, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for us to call everybody back for a one-day special session to provide unemployment benefits to steelworkers who are out of work. It just doesn't make a lot of sense not to call them back. And this it's kind of passive-aggressive mode of not cooperating and not assuming the mantle of leadership with myself and with others who have a responsibility not just to their districts and not just to the politics of 2016's election, but have a responsibility to lead this state forward. And to find them unwilling to step forward and assume that responsibility is extremely disappointing. I would invite the Speaker and members of his caucus, the working groups, to go up to the Iron Range with me, to go to North Minneapolis with me next week, and hear firsthand from people in those areas how urgent this situation is and how imperative it is that we take action, starting now, to remedy the circumstances in which they find themselves. We have overall a very healthy economy in Minnesota. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates of any state in the nation, but there are pockets of severe inequality and severe disparity and fear on the range about what's going to happen and how they're going to provide for their families through the winter without unemployment benefits. Anger and frustration in North Minneapolis at the continued disparities. And we have a chance to step forward now and take the first step the first step toward assuming the mantle of leadership and doing what we should be doing on behalf of the citizens of this state. And it's just wait to see tomorrow. I remain hopeful that the working groups will be able to make sufficient progress, and I have a meeting scheduled with the Speaker and Majority Leader Bach on Friday to get their assessment. But the indications so far from the Speaker and the House Republican caucus are very, very disappointing. Glad to respond to questions.
Governor, could you bring us up to date on where exactly we are on Real ID? The Speaker has indicated that he's willing to work, but it's not necessary right now. So where are we with Homeland Security and Minnesota?
Well, he says he's willing to work, but actions speak louder than words. We'd be justified to call a special session just to unbound the Commissioner of Public Safety, who right now is forbidden, and her people who are forbidden by law from communicating with the federal government or with the legislature or anybody else about Real ID. So if we want to even be prepared to remedy that situation in the beginning of the regular session, which if we still have not heard from Homeland Security, I don't know why, about this. We've heard verbally they're going to give a 4-month period of grace to resolve, which would take us into, at this point now, beginning of May. But that's at their discretion so far. We don't have, we've checked this week, we don't have official word on that. I don't know why that's the case, but it is the case. So I don't want to, I'm trying to be careful not to frighten people. As far as we know, everybody will be able to get on an airplane, commercial airplane, for the foreseeable future. As far as we know, they'll have access to federal buildings. But Minnesota Chamber sent a letter to me this week expressing their concern. The uncertainty factor is just unnecessary. So the first step is to remove the shackles from the Commissioner of Public Safety, and so that she and her people can work with the legislature, work with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and find out specifically what deficiencies. You have a copy of what were provided by Homeland Security. But run our proposed legislation by them so we can know that what we need to enact will meet their test. This is not about people on one side of the question and the other in Minnesota agreeing with one another. This is about satisfying the federal government that we're going to do what virtually every other state has done, which is to enact the standards of security that the federal government wants people to have before they get on an airplane. I mean, that's just common sense. And why we have to go through this kind of contortions and manipulations and deception to get to the real issue of Real ID is just beyond me. I mean, to get the draft legislation from the House that says that this would be conceptually put together by January of 2017, and then enacted into statute in January of 2018, I would be embarrassed to go to Homeland Security with that kind of proposal. I mean, it's not even reality. It's not reality based. When every other state, save one or two, have already complied. So it's like get real about Real ID.
When you say, as far as you know, Minnesotans will be able to board airplanes, which suggests that it's possible they won't. Is that possible?
I don't want to. I'm not going to. I'm not going to cry wolf and scare people unnecessarily, because people are already concerned because of the uncertainty factor. I can't say what the federal government's going to do. We've been given indications verbally, and have for the last couple of months, last year, that there would be a 4-month window of grace in order to make the changes necessary statutorily to come into compliance. But that's not in writing yet. It hasn't been officially announced yet. So that's as much as I know.
Governor, aside from the Real ID thing, why hasn't your administration supplied more details on the unemployment benefits that you want, including how many people could qualify for how long?
We've done that with the, we had a call 2 days ago with the range delegation to work out the details. We're prepared to go in tomorrow with specific legislation. That one's is a slam dunk.
Well, tell us how many weeks are you contemplating for
another 26 weeks. out of a fund which has a balance of $1.6 billion. This is not a single general fund taxpayer dollar involved in providing these extended benefits. This is out of the unemployment insurance fund, which has a balance now of $1.6 billion because we have such a good economy and low unemployment. And so to drag this out and leave these people with that kind of uncertainty about whether they're going to have just a minimal amount of income to provide for themselves and their families is just unconscionable. And again, this is not about people representing their own individual districts. This is about people, as the elected leaders of the state of Minnesota, doing what's right for people somewhere else in dire straits. We did this down in southwestern Minnesota with the ice storm. We did this in northeastern Minnesota with the flood. Minnesotans have stepped forward in a bipartisan way when other Minnesotans are facing great harm. And to continue to say, well, I'm not sure we can be bothered to have a special session to provide for those benefits for people who, through no choice of their own, no fault of their own, are out of work, who want to go back to work. But to deny that and say, well, it's just, what's the point? There's a point, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for us to call everybody back for a one-day special session. It's just unconscionable.
Governor, how many people are we talking about, the workers on the Iron Range, and how long ago did these benefits?
Well, the benefits run out on a staggered basis. I'd have to get the exact number, but it's several hundred now, and by the time the regular session begins in March, it'll be over 1,000. But let's get that number, and we'll get that specific back to you. But again, it's just extending this uncertainty for people about whether they're going to have benefits at all. I mean, to say it's not worth it for me to get in my car from Worthington, Minnesota, and drive up for one-day special session so you can get benefits for the next 26 months, 26 weeks. It's just it's very un-Minnesotan.
And would these benefits be, would you have to be a plant worker to qualify, or could you be somebody who's affected because you serve at a plant or you work at a vendor that is also slowed down because of the...
Well, these are people who are unemployed by federal, under the definition of Minnesota statute. We're not talking about changing the definition of an unemployed worker. So these would be people who have been laid off by, it depends on what the special session language says, but I would contemplate these are people who are being laid off by one of the steel companies.
Governor, is this whole situation suggesting that it was a mistake to schedule an interim rate this long, to wait until March to start the legislative session? Was that an error?
Well, I think it's the circumstances of the capital, unavailability of the capital. I don't know. It is what it is. So, but it's certainly one of the, reasons we shouldn't be waiting until the beginning of the session in March. And as we all know, things very rarely get done the first couple weeks of a session. We wait till the very end, which means we're talking about the middle to latter part of May before any of this gets resolved. And then we really are behind the 8 ball in terms of this Real ID, being able to have the conversations with Homeland Security and prepare the legislation necessary to comply and try to pack all that in when you've got people in the Minnesota House who don't want to even bring this subject up until 2017 or 2018. I mean, they're philosophically or ideologically opposed to any requirement of this type by the federal government. I respect that point of view. I disagree with it, but I respect it. But this is not about our satisfying ourselves. This is about our satisfying the federal government so our citizens can get on airplanes or get into federal buildings. So let's get real about Real ID and do what needs to be done. And it could be done in a special session. This could be taken care of in a one-day session if we could work cooperatively together and face up to the reality of what's required of us.
Governor, you had said before that the Real ID issue could be dealt with in the regular session. I think that the topic, at a special session agenda was at the urging of legislative leaders. Do you still believe that? I mean, I guess I'm still trying to understand the process by which Minnesota could be in compliance or not, because the speaker earlier today suggested that if it's repealed in a special session, that could buy the state more time to get another extension, because as he points out correctly that other states at the moment have extensions to get in compliance. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out, is this something that needs to be done before the regular session, and how quickly the Department of Public Safety could turn around and report on bringing the state to compliance?
Well, I don't have absolute clarity, and if we would get, if and when we get something in writing or a public statement from the Department of Homeland Security about what the their timetable is, as of now, what they have said is that as of January 1st, this prohibition on boarding planes without qualified identification, which would in Minnesota would be would require something like a social, like a passport, or what's the ID, the enhanced ID, enhanced driver's license. But you know, then they've qualified that verbally by saying that they're going to allow a 4-month period of grace for states like Minnesota that are not in compliance to do so. But that's not an official word yet, so we're still waiting and dealing with that uncertainty, which is why we should eliminate this uncertainty by facing up, like every other state, to virtually every other state, to what we have to do. And if you look at the details there that have been provided us by the Department of Homeland Security, this is not onerous. This is basic information: Social Security number, a proof of lawful residence. And you know, people who get on a commercial airplane should know that other people have met this basic standard of clearance before they get on a plane and put their lives on the line with them. So it's common sense. This is not invasive. Maybe back in 2009, I was involved then. I don't know what the concerns were then about this, but this is a molehill that's been blown into a huge mountain by people who think this is some kind of, you know, oppressive government overreaction. This is basic information to provide for the protection and the safety of our citizens. And those who profess and have sent me letters professing to be so concerned about the safety of our citizens, who won't take this modest step forward to enable the federal government to do what it says it needs to do to provide enhanced security for our citizens, are really hypocritical and childish. I mean, this is just about getting it done. This is about getting real and getting Real ID done for the people of Minnesota, and setting all this uncertainty aside and saying this is not a big deal. You know, what we need to be concerned about in terms of privacy are all the hackers who can hack into private information without our knowledge or approval. The federal government's not trying to do that. They're asking what's somebody's social security number. They're asking for proof of lawful residency. They're asking for basic information to allow somebody to get on an airplane with everybody else.
But again, do you prefer that to happen in a special session or in a regular one?
Well, I'm being realistic. I mean, we can't even get a special session. It's essential that we have, in a special session, we remove the shackles from the Commissioner of Public Safety and her department, so they can communicate with the Homeland Security, and we know exactly what is going to be required to bring ourselves into compliance. If we could have done that over the last couple of weeks, we could walk into the special session with a bill that would accomplish the whole thing. But we're not there. We're not even beginning to get there because of that prohibition. So realistically, and given that I'm anticipating 120 days of forbearance, you know, what I would hope to come out of the special session, what we need to have come out of the special session is to lift that prohibition on just communicating with the federal government to find out exactly what's necessary, and we will prepare legislation. They say we don't have legislation. We will prepare legislation down to the last sentence of what's necessary. We believe what we're told is necessary to bring Minnesota into compliance and give every Minnesotan the assurance that they're going to be able to go about their lives and go about their business unrestricted. And it's just irresponsible to do otherwise.
Governor, you've been in office since 2010. You've had 5 legislative sessions. Why was this not on your radar before now?
Well, we've been aware of it in general, but you know, given the opposition of a part of the Republican caucus to any kind of modification, even to lifting this prohibition against communication, it just was clear it wasn't going to go anywhere. And I assume back in 2009 or 10, when it passed on an overwhelming bipartisan basis, the vote was overwhelming. There appeared to be no consequence from taking that position. It was like, well, we're not going to have the federal government tell us what to do, but there's no consequence from taking that position. And it wasn't until, you know, we started to realize that there is a consequence, and now we know what the consequence is, that there becomes the imperative that, that this be done. So some things you can't do until there's an imperative that you do it.
Do you understand this?
Haven't you waited too long so that now it's become a desperate situation?
No.
Whereas for the last 5 years, it could have been an easier fix to get rid of what you call the
We
shackles.
wouldn't have gotten to first base with these folks. We can't get to a special session with them. We can't get them to cooperate and to have the point of having a special session now under duress. If we had you know, rational adults that were engaged with us in this matter, and I don't mean the speaker and everybody in the Republican caucus, but the people who are driving the bus on this, the people who are opposed to any kind of you know, changes necessary in existing statute to come into compliance, they're running the show over there. You know, the speaker says that's one of the frustrations I have. He comes in and we have these, you know, cordial meetings, and he says he's going to be concerned, and then he goes out and he throws red meat to his right-wing base and says, no, we're not going to do it. And they all jump up and down. Well, at some point you got to transcend that and show leadership. And, you know, I've been accused, I guess, if I read the tweets, of burning my bridges. This is a bridge to nowhere. This is a bridge to 2018. I mean, I would be embarrassed to go back to Homeland Security and ask them if we could have until January of 2018 to enact legislation, because we need to think about it for 2 more years. I mean, it's just, it's really, it would be laughable if it weren't so serious.
Back to unemployment for a moment, to finish Brian's question. You said that you won the 26-week extension for the minors. The state unemployment insurance director told me yesterday there probably are more non-minors who are laid off, and they don't have a handle on those numbers like they do on the mines. Would you be in favor of extending unemployment insurance to these people who are not minors, who may work downtown, or maybe, as Brian said, vendors or something like that?
The first time somebody's brought it up, I'd certainly be willing to look at it. And that's, again, where the working group can be productive in looking at those possibilities. I mean, we have a fund, as I say, we're sitting on $1.6 billion, and not to utilize it for people who need it seems to me to be unjust.
Governor, back to Real ID, you have spoken of this prohibition in statute about your commissioner speaking to the federal government. Does that prohibition extend to other members of your administration, or are there staffers in your office or other people in your administration who can proceed with this work without a special session?
Our read from general counsel is that it does not apply to others, and my chief of staff and deputy chief of staff have been the ones communicating with the Homeland Security and getting whatever information we can.
Well, given that, is this ban that's in statute really that much of an impediment from having legislation ready for early March?
Well, it is, because we can't implement. We can't even have our own conversations with Commissioner of Public Safety and her people about what changes would have to be made in their driver ID. Some of the questions about, you know, well, so the people who don't want to, is there going to be an additional cost for people who want a compliant Real ID? Is there people who don't want that intrusion as they view it into their basic information? Can they get a license that does not meet that requirement? And just, you know, what is necessary mechanically to transfer from the current situation to the new one. So all of that takes the people with the expertise, the technicians.
The speaker called on you today to put forth your own proposal for a special session to address this issue. Is it your position that the only thing that would need to be done in a special session is to lift the 2009 law?
No, my position is we need to do that. We need to extend unemployment benefits.
I'm sorry, strictly on Real ID.
Well, I think we could, in theory, deal with the whole thing. If the Republican leadership would sit down, and Representative Scott, who shares their working group, who's adamantly opposed to any changes of this kind. So, you know, I mean, this could have been, we could have worked all this out going into a special session and get taken care of and go on with the things that, you know, well, this is important to Minnesotans because they can't get on an airplane without it. So I don't want to minimize the importance of it, but it could have and should have been taken care of. And the session should have been able to bring this to a proper conclusion. And then we wouldn't have to drag it out into the regular session and all the end games and the like. But that's just realistically not possible, and now we can't even get them to show up for a special session to lift the prohibition, which means we're going to start in the beginning of the regular session in March without being able to do the legwork and the preparation necessary to have a bill that we know complies and bring that before the legislature. I mean, I almost wonder if they don't want to make it impossible for my administration to carry out what's necessary to be done. They won't unshackle us so we can have the communications necessary to do this. And then they turn around and point the finger and say, well, you know, the Dayton administration has failed to take care of this matter. So when it's their law, that their unwillingness to repeal the law, that prevents us from doing so. And that's where, again, to stand up together and assume the mantle of leadership and say, like it or not, this is what we have to do. I mean, this is not, again, about the policies or the politics of the state legislature or, the 2016 election. This is about the elected leaders of Minnesota stepping forward and facing up to what has to be done to come in compliance with federal requirement to allow our citizens to board commercial airplanes. And there's no evasion responsible evasion to that requirement.
So do you bear no responsibility for not getting this done previously?
I don't take responsibility, no. I would have lifted the law in 2011 or 12, but again, there was no imperative to do so. Now there's the imperative.
Did your administration try to lift the law in 11 or 12?
I don't believe it. Well, no, I will say it was not on our radar screen then because there wasn't any consequence.
Governor, you know the working groups are going to be meeting tomorrow at the Capitol complex. And last week you suggested a deadline of Friday. Is your deadline still firm, still hold? Are you amenable to moving that? What are your thoughts right now?
Well, we're scheduled to meet Friday morning with the Speaker and the Majority Leader. And I gather they're meeting tomorrow night to make their assessment. So I'll have to hear what they have to say. If they need, it's not cast in stone if they need another week or whatever to get this done. Or again, I invite the Republican caucus members in the working group to go up to the range with me and see firsthand the misery that exists up there with the uncertainty about unemployment benefits, and go up to the North Minneapolis and see firsthand the sense of urgency there for these actions to be taken. So I'm willing to do whatever keeps the matter in play. But the Speaker himself has said, well, we're getting close to the regular session. Well, we are because they dilly-dallied for so long. It was over a month ago that I proposed this special session. We could have had it already, or we could have it this week, and get it all taken care of. We're still trying to get the working groups assembled for the first time tomorrow. So it's like drag your heels, drag your heels, drag your heels. So and then he goes and tells Bloomington's group that that there's not going to be a special, very unlikely there'll be a special session. Well, he hasn't communicated that to me. So just come straight forward. Say you want to handle Real ID and then have a draft legislation that's going to take care of it in 2018. I mean, let's get real. Just come straight. That's all I ask, is just come straight. If they don't want to do a special session, then say so, and we'll have to deal with that. If they're not willing to face up to the requirements of the federal government to comply with Real ID on a timely basis, then tell the people of Minnesota that. But don't go out there and say, well, yeah, we really want to have a special session, or yeah, we really want to take care of this, and then with their actions, totally obviate that.
Governor, the Speaker said the dates in their bill for Real ID were placeholders, and he told you that, he says, and you said, that's fine.
He didn't tell me anything. He didn't tell me anything about it. After we provided it to a reporter at his request, then they came back to us, tried to disassemble what they said and claimed that these were placeholders. They didn't communicate anything of that nature. They sent the bill over. This is the one bill, the only content and the only bill they sent. And, you know, we, unlike the legislature, we are required to provide public information. You know, they exempt themselves, so they can sit on this and nobody can know, and then they can tell you one thing when in fact it's not true. We exist under the laws that apply to every other part of the executive branches. Where if you ask for information, we're obligated to provide it. So we did. And then they started disassembling from it all and claiming, well, this is one of several drafts. Well, what other drafts have they provided? I haven't seen anything else. And that's, again, just be straight, you know? Come out and tell the truth. If you want to wait till 2018, then that's your position, then okay. But then say it straight and tell us why you think that's acceptable to the federal government, first of all. And secondly, why you think it's justified. It's very difficult. I have a very hard time dealing with people who tell me one thing and then do something else. It's just very, and it's not leadership.
You said last week in a conversation with the speaker, first of all, did you have a phone conversation?
We had a phone conversation last Tuesday last week.
And he didn't say anything about placeholder, the dates being placeholders?
We didn't talk about specific legislation. I was not aware at that time that they had draft legislation. That was a communication that my chief of staff had with someone on his staff, and then they provided that draft legislation. That's the only draft we received of any kind, and it was not. I don't know the conversation. I can't say whether it was explicitly said it was a placeholder or what, but that's the only thing we received in writing.
Governor, do you have visits planned for the range in North Minneapolis, or is that something you're proposing?
I'm proposing.
And on the issue of the economic disparities, do you have a more detailed proposal ready now?
Well, I keep saying this until I'm blue in the face, and I guess given the weather forecast for next week, we'll all be blue in the face. But I said I wanted to come out of the process. I met last week with the NAACP leadership in Minnesota, and I met with representatives of Neighborhoods Organizing for Change and Black Lives Matter, and I've solicited from them suggestions, and we have suggestions. The chamber wants the satellite office the NAACP wants the satellite office in St. Cloud, which was unfunded, to be reinstated and funded. They want an outside audit of the performance of my administration would be over the last 5 years in terms of affirmative action within the state government. And so we have language drafted that would accomplish both those. Neighborhoods Organizing for Change wanted, and they weren't explicit, but they wanted the funding that would go for creating job opportunities and training people for those job opportunities. We could put, we have that ready to go. We'll have it ready to go tomorrow. But the process I wanted to see was that we would work together cooperatively and solicit ideas from legislators, certainly, as well as other involved groups, and put this together. But that is just a cop-out to say we haven't provided the specific language. We could get the specific language done tomorrow before lunch and get the whole thing resolved and agreed to by dinner time. If spirit of cooperation and a real desire to do so, we're there. But to try to put the finger on me, I'm the one who's spent a month trying to get them to come to the point of even having working groups and having them meet. And now it's supposedly our fault because we haven't been forthcoming. And the unemployment thing is, we have language worked out. It's very basic. It's eminently affordable. We have $1.6 billion. The question about applying it to other unemployed workers is certainly something to consider, and the working group should do so. But it's like, drag your heels, and blame us. That's not leadership.
Governor, question for my colleague in D.C. U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch asked all 50 governors this week to comply with a federal database that tracks criminal backgrounds to trace gun purchases. I believe Minnesota may already be in compliance, but just wanted to get your thoughts in general on that request and the actions of President Obama now.
NICS is called, the NICS, that I'm told we're in full compliance. We've been one of the first states to be forthcoming and have been on a bipartisan basis. Plenty of administration now mine, but we will get more detail from the Attorney General. We just got a letter of general guidance, but we will follow up with the U.S. Attorney General and find out if there are any deficiencies in the information we're providing. that we will do so. We want to be in full compliance.
Do you have any personal comment on the NPCA investigation into the employee who sent emails regarding pipelines?
Well, there are 34,000 state employees, and most of them were there before I arrived, and most of them will be there after I leave. And this is a classified employee in MAPE who's been there, I don't know how many years, but was there when I arrived. You know, the fact that somebody has a personal opinion that differs with mine is not of concern to me, but the fact that Commissioner Linkstein is going to conduct an investigation, get all the information before we make a judgment. But somebody who's in that position, who's playing an advocacy role with advocate organizations, is really crossed the line of what their professional responsibilities are. If somebody who's responsible in a regulatory way for making sure that the environment is protected as they should, but if they're going to get into political advocacy, they should resign their position and run for the legislature, or go to work for one of the organizations who's opposed to the pipeline, and take those positions in a responsible way. So I'm very concerned about it. It's not, again, it's not evidence, in my view, of a position of my administration is contrary to my position. But again, somebody having their own personal opinion that is contrary to my position is acceptable. Somebody who's behind the scenes crossing over the regulatory line and taking one side or another is in my view, very inappropriate.
Is that a fireable offense, Governor?
You know, I'm not going to say because until an investigation is conducted, he's a MAPE employee. He's protected under all the regulations, personnel regulations that apply. But we take it very seriously, and Commissioner Linkstein has commenced today an investigation to get all the facts and get all the evidence that's available, and then make a determination in accordance with the procedures that are set up for MAPE employees.
Have you been told, at least on a preliminary basis, what his precise role has been in reviewing the Sandpiper?
I just received the information late yesterday afternoon. First that I'd heard of it, first that Commissioner Linkstein had heard of it. So we really haven't had a chance to develop any factual basis.
Did anyone indicate to you that he's had a prominent role in this?
I don't know his exact role. He's up in the Brainerd office, I'm told, which is proximate to the route. And so I believe he has. It's my understanding he has had a role. Exactly what that role is, I can't say. But again, I take it very seriously. And most importantly, because the integrity of a regulatory agency like Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is the fairness and objectivity of the people who uphold those laws and regulations. It's not so much about his personal opinion differs from mine. It's that he has a responsibility, professional responsibility, to act in accordance with the laws and the regulations of a regulatory agency. And I'm not saying that he hasn't, because I don't have that information, but that's my area of primary concern.
Anything else?
Governor, on Real ID, the speaker said that you relayed to him indication from Homeland Security that the enforcement of the last stage of Real ID compliance wouldn't come until July at the earliest. Is that true?
I did not say that to him. That's new information for me. The only thing I've ever heard is 4 months from their date of official pronouncement, which we were told was going to occur last year and has not yet been forthcoming, and we don't know why. It's what's delayed at the federal level. But I know that's new information for me, and I never communicated that information. And again, I'm trying my best not to. I don't want to scare Minnesotans that they can't get on a plane tomorrow, and I don't want to. And I also don't want them to think that we can just wait till 2018 with no consequence. So I'm being straightforward with the information that I have, and as soon as we receive something, or when we do in writing from Homeland Security, we'll share that with all of you and with the public. And hopefully we'll have a firm deadline. My expectation is, like most things that are controversial, this won't be done until it has to be done. And if that means we have till the end of the legislative session, we'll have that long. If it means that May 1st becomes an absolute deadline, then we'll have a necessity to resolve it before then. But we really need this, I mean, if we go into session without this prohibition being lifted, we're going to be severely handicapped in trying to work out legislation that's in compliance when we can't have our agency responsible for it communicate with the legislature or with the federal government.